Well, here we are at the Halloween special. Let me just say, this is a video I've wanted to do for a long time. Out of all the remakes I've done this year, this is the one I was most looking forward to. Now, why is that? Well, I really liked the idea of it. Counting down the darkest games I've played was a lot of fun to do last time, and the video turned out pretty good. Except for the audio quality, which was absolutely terrible. Yeah, I'm still not quite sure what happened there. Interesting thing to note is that this is the first countdown I've done a third edition of, because the original was top 5 darkest and happiest games, all the way back in 2013. Even by my standards back then, that video was garbage. Then there was the one I did 2 years ago that's mostly good aside from the terrible audio quality. And now here we are with the third version that says it's the second version in the title. Hooray for logic. Rules are same as always, one per franchise and only games I've played. And while this should be pretty obvious, I'm going to say it anyway. This video will have plenty of disturbing content in it, cause you know, it's the 10 darkest games I've played. So if you don't want to deal with that, leave now. With all that out of the way, let's begin. You know, considering how complicated this list is going to get as we go along, I think it'd be best to start with something simple. How about a game where you do nothing but light things on fire? Well, that's a little Inferno for ya. In this game, you order various items from a catalog and light them on fire, and you can get bonuses by lighting certain combinations of objects on fire. Now I know what you're probably thinking. Why are you doing this? Why are you ordering all these things just to light them on fire? Well, as it turns out, there is a reason. The whole world is undergoing global cooling, so you need to throw a bunch of stuff into your little Inferno entertainment fireplace in order to keep warm. This is explained to you both by the weatherman's letters and by the little Inferno instructional video, which is by far the most screwed up part of the whole game. But even beyond that video, the game just has an odd feel to it with the way the information's conveyed to you. You're stuck looking at your fireplace, and the only information you get from the outside world is through the letters you receive. In fact, your neighbor, Sugar Plumps, sends you letters throughout the entire game, and at first, they're really fun and quirky. But then, halfway through the game, her house burns down, and she still sends you letters afterwards, only these letters are a lot more existential and unsettling. Okay, so I guess Little Inferno really isn't that dark, but at the same time, we're just getting started here. You know, last time around, I put Little Inferno above Mechanika, but when I thought about it, the worst part of Little Inferno was the training video, and Mechanika is a lot like that video, only darker, funnier, and lasting pretty much the entire game. I guess that's to be expected. After all, who wouldn't expect dark humor from a game in a series called Psychotic Adventures? Both Mechanika and Agatha Knife take place in the same hilariously screwed up world. So why did I pick Mechanika? After all, Agatha Knife is a pretty good satire of religion, which is something that most games don't dare tackle so bluntly. Well, I think it comes down to the main characters. You see, with Agatha, despite never sleeping and living in her mother's butcher shop, not the house, the butcher shop, she's perfectly happy with her life. Nika, on the other hand, hates the whole world around her and wants to destroy it and start over. And the craziest part is that as you go through the game, you can't really blame her. Her parents always ignore her, she's clearly too smart for school, and just about everyone around town seems to be a complete moron, jerk, or both. It's like watching an episode of Dan Versus. You know she's in the wrong for what she's doing, but at the same time you can't help but root for her. Like I said earlier, the reason for this game's placement on the list is its delightfully twisted sense of humor. Between this and Agatha Knife, I don't think I've played any other games with a darker sense of humor. And yes, I'm including the South Park RPGs in that. If you want some examples of that, just look up the reason for the feud between Nika's grandparents. It's friggin' hilarious, and I dare not spoil it here. Also, one of the main mechanics of the game is whenever you need a hint, just click on Nika's flask and she'll take a swig. Let me repeat that. She's 7 years old, and she's getting drunk to solve her problems. I think I've said enough. You want a sign of how much things have changed since my first one of these lists? This game was #1 on that original list. So for all you retro Defoffilizer fans, first off, I'm very sorry for the quality of videos back then. But secondly, you already know what game I'm talking about. The Cave. At its core, The Cave is a game about people chasing after what they desire most and how that's not always a good decision. There are 7 characters in the game, likely based off of the 7 deadly sins, and each one, while in the cave, relives whatever horrible thing they did in their past as a result of what they desired. Some of these actions include mass arson, selling their technology to create weapons of mass destruction, wiping an entire family line out of existence, and killing their own parents. And here's the thing, while these stories are told through the various cave paintings, each character also has their own story level where you have to perform these very actions in order to progress. And even though the cave sarcastically narrates his way through all of this, he still doesn't shy away from all the destruction that your actions cause. Even outside of the story levels, you're forced to step all over everyone just to get to your goal. It honestly feels like a karma-based game where you're only allowed to pick the evil option, except when you get to the end. Tell me if you've heard this one before. Video games are violent. I mean, it's true. Don't get me wrong, I'm not gonna pull a Fox News on you and claim that video games are creating killers, or pull a Cracked on you and claim that video games are somehow an especially violent medium, but yeah, a lot of big video games out there are pretty violent. And I don't have a problem with that, because oftentimes it's pretty fun. But that sort of does make you think how it's kind of weird that you're having this much fun playing something so violent. And when it comes to examining this question, I can't think of a series that does it better than the Hotline Miami games. You see, the goal in every level is to kill all the enemies and then move on. And each playable character throughout the series has their own reasons for doing so. But there's always the lingering question of, are they really just doing this for the reasons they tell themselves they are? Or deep down, do they really enjoy all this carnage? And the game cleverly extends that question to the player, because unlike other games that make a big deal about the violence going on, Hotline Miami makes its combat system a lot of fun, with all the various abilities, the general challenge, and that awesome techno music in the background. So it's clear that you, the player, are having a good time with this. Wouldn't it make sense that the character you're playing as is also reveling in the carnage? But then there's the matter of why I picked Hotline Miami 2. You see, in the original game, there's only one playable character until you get to the after game. In Hotline Miami 2, though, there are a lot of characters you play as, and you get to see what each one of them is going through. And not all of them are exactly on the same side, so there's plenty of uncomfortable moments in the game where one of the playable characters straight up murders another one of them in cold blood. I mean, you're not gonna feel too bad taking down another mafia goon or masked killer, but when you spend a decent amount of time with said mafia goon or masked killer, learning about their hopes, dreams, and aspirations, you start to feel the weight of the violence you've been enjoying so much a lot more. You know, horror's kind of a weird video game genre if you really think about it. The names of the other genres describe the gameplay of the game, while horror more so describes the story and especially the atmosphere. As a result, there are plenty of games that fall into a gray area where people can't quite decide if it counts as horror or not. And one of the biggest games I know of in that category is Bioshock. I think the reason why Bioshock fits so neatly into that little gray area is because on one hand, they don't limit your items or abilities in order to make you feel helpless, but at the same time, they are damn good at creating a creepy atmosphere. The City of Rapture does a great job of being both fascinating and unsettling at the same time. It's pretty dangerous, with just about everyone having lost their minds and the intimidating number of big daddies prowling around, but it's also pretty tragic too. You can tell that Rapture was once a great bustling city filled to the brim with innovation, but now it's just a dilapidated shell of its former self. And as you collect audio logs throughout your journey, you start to fill in the blanks both of what Rapture was like when it was still great and what caused its eventual collapse. You get to see the personal stories of these people, why they came to Rapture, and how many of their lives ended up getting destroyed in the process. It's an atmospheric and fascinating, yet tragic and disturbing adventure the whole way through. You know, I've talked about Danganronpa a lot this year, and this video is no exception. I mean, come on, it's a game series where a bunch of high school students are forced to kill each other if they want to escape from somewhere. It kinda had to be on the list. Just a quick heads up, since it's hard to talk about any of these games in a really meaningful way without spoiling anything, there's going to be spoilers for the entire series in this entry. I think the biggest thing that makes these games dark is the impact that all the deaths have. Most of the characters are really likable, or at the very least memorable, and you spend a lot of time getting to know them. So it really hits you hard whenever you see them brutally killed. And you never know who's going to die next, or when it's going to happen. Sure, there are some small hints that they telegraph, but they're always so subtle that you never notice them until after the fact. Also, plot armor does not exist in these games. Oh, Sayaka, she seems like she's gonna be your companion throughout the game, so I'm sure she'll last a while, maybe die towards the end to give Makoto something to fight for. Really? She's the first one to die? Chiaki seems to fill a similar role to Kyoko, so I'm sure she'll last till the end. Oh, well, I guess not. Okay, I figured out a pattern. They always let the most fan-servicey character in the game live till the end, so Miu's gotta be safe, right? Nope. Okay, the main character. Certainly, they would not kill off the main character, the one you play as, especially not in the first chapter. Are you kidding me? But what happens when you finally find out the killer? Well, it's not really that satisfying either, because that was also a character you got to know, and for the most part, with a few exceptions, they had a pretty good reason for doing what they did, and Monokuma's executions, while incredibly flashy, are nothing short of brutal. I put the entire series at this entry so you can pick your poison. Do you want the original with its dark and foreboding atmosphere, much more befitting of a killing game, Danganronpa 2 with its brighter and more relaxed atmosphere, catching you even more off guard whenever someone dies, V3, which is V3, or Ultra Despair Girls, the incredibly weird spin-off which is dark for entirely different reasons, and seems to be a limitless treasure trove of why is the FBI here memes just waiting to happen. However, as dark as things get in this series, each game always finds a way to have a pretty optimistic ending, which is definitely more than I can say for the next game on the list. Remember when I said that Agatha Knife was a satire on religion and that most games wouldn't dare do something like that? The key word there is most. You see, Agatha Knife's thesis on religion is that it's a scam. A relatively harmless scam that makes a lot of people feel better, but a scam nonetheless. The Binding of Isaac isn't nearly that kind. Here's a 3-step tip for instant hilarity that you can try at home. Step 1. Find someone who's never heard of The Binding of Isaac. Step 2. Show them the game's intro. Step 3. Watch their reaction.
Go into his room and end his life as an offering to me to prove you love me above all else. Yes, Lord, she replied, grabbing a butcher's knife from the kitchen.
Okay, but before we get into the really heavy stuff, let's take a look at some of the more minor stuff. Despite the cartoony art style, all these enemies are horrific abominations, and whenever Isaac gets a power-up, it involves mutilating himself. Now, on one hand, none of this is real. Isaac's mom isn't actually trying to kill him, and Isaac's not really fighting off these monsters. It's made pretty clear that this is all in Isaac's imagination. But that just raises the question of what would cause him to imagine stuff like this. I mean, aside from all these horrifying monsters, there's some other things in these adventures, like Isaac killing his mom, Isaac killing himself, and Isaac going through his mom's womb, killing her heart, and then eventually it lives, which some people theorize is an unborn version of Isaac. And then of course you get to the heavy Christian symbolism in this game. It's clear religion has not had a positive impact on this kid. Just look at the ending where he reads the Bible and sees himself as a demon because of it. Plus, there's the title of this game, which is named after a Bible story where Abraham is told to sacrifice his son in order to prove his devotion to God. Gee, I wonder where Isaac got the idea that his super religious mother would be willing to kill him in order to appease her deity. For those of you who don't know, this was number 1 on my 2016 version of this list. And we still have 4 more games to go. Yes, I said 4. It'll make sense in the next entry. What do you think of when you think a dark version of Alice in Wonderland? Oh, you poor sweet child. You see, in most interpretations of Alice in Wonderland, Wonderland is chalked up to Alice's overactive imagination. What if instead it was a coping mechanism to fight back PTSD that was brought on by Alice watching her entire family die in a house fire? In that case, you would get Alice Madness Returns, a game where Alice travels through a twisted, screwed up version of Wonderland to help deal with the madness that she has going on. But this entry doesn't solely belong to that game. Oh no, because I've played another game with a similar premise that's about as dark. Fran Bow. In Fran Bow, the game's titular character is a 10-year-old girl who was admitted to a mental institution after watching her parents get brutally murdered. And after taking drugs offered to her in the asylum, she starts seeing creatures from another world. So yeah, I think it's pretty easy to see why it grouped these two together. Also, for those complaining about disturbing imagery, I think the Isaac entry should have tipped you off that I wasn't screwing around with my warning at the beginning. But now that I've gone over the similarities, it's only fair to compare the two. On visuals alone, it's not a question. Fran Bow is definitely the more disturbing game. I mean, just look at this. However, when it comes to other elements, Alice seems to be the darker game. I mean, for starters, just look at the way they structure their disturbing content. In Alice Madness Returns, each level is more disturbing than the last, while with Fran Bow, it's kind of all over the place. The most unsettling level is the first one, and Chapter 3 is actually quite beautiful, with only occasional reminders that you're playing a horror game. But then by the time you make it to Chapter 5, things have gotten scary again, but by this point, you've seen everything the game has to throw at you. And then there's what the games are leading up to story-wise. The reveal at the end of Fran Bow certainly is tragic, but the reveal at the end of Alice Madness Returns is the most disturbing plot twist I've ever seen. Then there's the matter of the protagonists. Fran is significantly younger than Alice, but at the same time, Fran doesn't seem nearly as freaked out about what's happening to her as Alice is. And then there's the ambiguity of everything. In Alice Madness Returns, it's made clear that Wonderland is how Alice copes with her current mental state. In Fran Bow, on the other hand, they keep it pretty ambiguous as to whether this is all in Fran's head or if all this stuff is actually happening. So at the end of the day, I don't really know which game is darker, which is why I combined them into one slot. You know, if I recall correctly, I think I finished the original This Is the Police around the same time that I started on my 2016 version of this list. Since I had just played through the game, I wasn't entirely sure how I felt about it and didn't really know whether or not I should put it on the list. Now, I'm not entirely sure that happened, but if it did, all I'm saying is I'm not making the same mistake again. This Is the Police 2 is at this spot. Now we're getting into the realm of games where even the gameplay mechanics make you feel uncomfortable. You see, to me, both games in this series felt like resource management games where you never had enough resources to get the job done. I fully admit that might just be because I suck at them, but I've seen other people complain about this too. However, the big difference here is that in the original, there weren't too many consequences for poor strategy. Sure, if you don't make it to the $500,000, you don't get the good ending, but it's basically the same as the bad ending. In the sequel, the consequences are much greater. Instead of a $500,000 goal at the end, you have a $20,000 weekly ransom payment to Fry. And if you don't pay up, he gives your location to the FBI and it's game over. Also, your success each day is managed in a much more tangible way. The beer tab system. You do something right, you gain beer tabs. You do something wrong, you lose beer tabs. And if you lose more than you gain 3 days in a row, Lily calls the FBI on you and it's game over. Just like the first game, the things you're encouraged to do in order to meet your goals are pretty morally questionable, if not outright terrible. I mean, going back to the beer tab system, you get an extra beer tab if a suspect gets killed. Also, you gain a ton of beer tabs if you get a guilty conviction. Mind you, it doesn't actually matter if the person did it or not, it just matters that there's a conviction. And there's plenty of stuff like that all throughout the game. However, the reason why this game is so high up on the list is because of its main character, Jack Boyd. In the first game, he was somewhat sympathetic. Sure, he was corrupt and did bad things, but there was a sense of him at the very least wanting to do the right thing, and you could tell his life was spiraling out of control. In This Is the Police 2, on the other hand, I honestly don't want to get into it because I plan on covering this in a future countdown. But let me just say, he is as despicable as it gets. And he's the main character. He's the one you're controlling. He's the one whose agenda you're helping to further. I think that speaks for itself. The darkest game I've ever played, without a doubt, has to be Kirby's Epic Yarn. This game disgusts me. I mean, look at that. Kirby just rips his enemies open and their insides fly everywhere. Heck, sometimes he even mutilates their corpses and uses them as weapons against their comrades. If you really don't believe me, just look at this reaction from a horrified Let's Player witnessing the grotesque amounts of gore in this game.
Oh man, they're decapitating that poor snowman! Look at that, they're decapitating him, how violent! And they did it all just to make a knit hat!
And to think, this game was rated E for everyone? ESRB, Nintendo, what the heck is wrong with you two? You really think kids should be exposed to something this disgusting? They shouldn't play a gore fest like this, they should play happy, age-appropriate games. Like Lisa the Painful. Yeah, back in top 10 games I respect but don't like, I said that Lisa the Painful was the darkest game I ever played. And that's still true. Since that was the first video I talked about this game, I think I'll start off with what I mentioned in that video. Just like with This Is the Police, this is another game where the gameplay is made purposely stressful to help immerse you in the world. Just like most other RPGs, this game has items. However, there's plenty of items that are finite and necessary to make it past certain challenges. You don't want to hoard them though, as you can get robbed at a moment's notice. The game also has plenty of party members for you to recruit. Don't get too attached to them though, because they can be gone at a moment's notice. How so? Well, some enemies have permadeath attacks, they can get kidnapped when you stop to rest and heal up your party, they can get killed in one of Buzzo's ultimatums, or even in a mandatory Russian roulette minigame. That minigame's actually where I stopped playing. No worries though, because I am well aware of what happens in the rest of the game. Also, going back to Buzzo's ultimatums, not only can he kill party members, but he can also mutilate Brad, making him permanently weaker. Not only that, but a good deal of the characters in the game, including Brad, are addicted to a drug called joy. And these addictions do impact the combat. Now, we don't know enough about any of the party members to know why they're addicted, but since Brad's the main character, we do know why he takes it. It's to repress the memories of his abusive father. Yeah, that's right. We Happy Few wasn't the first game to have a drug called joy that suppressed traumatic memories. There is a key difference between the side effects, though. In We Happy Few, from what I understand, the worst that happens when you take joy is that you puke up a little blood and then go on with your day. In Lisa, when someone overdoses on joy, they turn into a joy mutant. And let me just say, the joy mutants are the most disturbing monster designs I've seen in any video game. And keep in mind, I was just talking about Fran Bow 2 entries back. But now I'm sure there's the question that's been rattling around in the back of your mind. Who's Lisa? Who is this character that the game was named after? Oh, she's the person on the title screen. She's also Brad's sister. And despite how bad Brad had it in Marty's household, Lisa had it significantly worse. to the point where the reason Buzzo is torturing Brad throughout the game is because he blames him for not stopping what happened to Lisa. But with all that out of the way, I think I should get to the main story of the game. In the post-apocalyptic wasteland of Olathe, Brad comes across a baby girl out in the middle of the desert. In order to atone for his failures in protecting Lisa, Brad decides to take the child in. He names her Buddy, and along with his 3 friends, they decide to raise her. This goes on for an unspecified number of years until she's kidnapped. This is probably the part of the story where I should tell you that Buddy is the last human female alive in all of Olathe. Now just then, I'm pretty sure a thought just entered your head. A thought that you really do not want to entertain because of how disturbing it is. Certainly, the main premise of the game isn't this disturbing. Certainly, they don't focus on something like this. Now, I'm not going to say you're wrong, nor am I going to claim to be a mind reader. All I'm going to say is that porno magazines are the currency in this game. I mean, nothing's shown on screen, but that's the nicest thing I can say. Now that you've filled in all the blanks in your head, I think you can see why this is number 1 on the list. I am Defoffilizer, and while I do like this countdown idea, and I don't tend to remake lists unless the number 1's going to be different, I also really hope nothing tops this. Bye!